Welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to construct the logic diagram exercise step by step. Before we do that though, let's take a look at some hand-drawn examples. This first one here is correct, but there are a number of crossing lines. This is to be expected the first time around, given that we only have a limited set of 9 steps or variables to work with. This next one is a refinement of our last chart by trying to clean up all the crossing lines. It gets very close, but as you can see, there's still a crossing line going from C to W. And finally, the last chart is the correct solution without any crossing lines. This makes it so much easier to read and comprehend. And this is our eventual goal. But sometimes it takes a little trial and error to achieve what you set out to accomplish. These 3 charts show that progression of thought. Okay, on to the solution. Okay, let's say we go in order right down the list and we'll analyze each step. Number 1, P precedes M. So since we don't know where each operation is going to go in the end, we sort of have to start by placing these 2 in the middle until we see how things develop. Neither item was designated as a starting or ending operation, so we know they'll be somewhere in the middle. We are going to use a line with an arrow for our operations. The arrow will signify that the operation is complete and the direction of the next step. Number 2. Okay, this is important because it says these 3 steps, C, N, and A, are initial activities. So they're going to start before all other steps. Well, that's great. So we now know that these are the starting operations in our chart. Number 3, E follows N. Well, that's easy enough. Let's go ahead and do that. Number 4, C restrains the start of W, P, and T. Well, in other words, C has to be completed before W, P, or T. Well, we haven't added T and W yet, but they both have to be after C just like P, so let's align them with P and connect them now. Number 5, J can start after A is completed. So let's go ahead and add J and connect it to A. Number 6, W follows J. Okay, this is where things start getting interesting. We know from step number 4 that W follows C, or as it's written, restrains the start. In other words, W follows C. And, well, so does J. For now, we just need to capture the logic as described. Later, we'll look for ways to reorganize the steps so we can minimize the number of crossing lines. Number 7, T occurs after E. Once again, we have lines that cross. Even so, this is the correct path, so let's go ahead and draw it in. Number 8, M, W, and S must all be completed before X, the last operation, can be executed. Fantastic. So X is the last operation in the exercise. I'm going to put it down on the bottom here so we can keep the list in our view. While we're here, let's go ahead and connect M to X and W to X as indicated. So far we haven't talked about S yet, and looking through all the steps now, we don't have a clear idea where S should start. We do know, however, that it will be completed before X, just like all the other steps have to be. So let's just simply put it down here before X. Number 9, and finally T comes before S. So let's go ahead and write that in. Great, okay, we have completed the exercise correctly. Only it's not all that easy on the eyes. Let's see if by using a little critical thinking we could minimize the number of crossing lines and thereby making this chart much easier to read. In order to make this exercise easier to read with less crossing lines, we are going to need to rearrange things a bit. When we originally drew in C, N, and A, we established they were starting operations, so we placed them on the left and in the order they were noted in the steps. This is where a little critical thinking is in order. Since C, N, and A all start at the same time, we can change their vertical arrangement and not change the solution so long as all the operations are still connected correctly. More on this in a minute. Okay, we're going to rebuild the exercise. Let's go ahead and start with A going to J. And if we look ahead, we see that A goes to J, and then to W, and finally to X. Let's just deal with these first three, A to J to W, for now. We're going to skip N for a moment and work on C, as there are more connections to deal with. We see that C comes before P, T, and W. So let's put T and P and align them with J. Now we can connect C to T, C to P, and finally C to W. Now it's time to deal with the last of our three starting points, N. Before we had N in the middle of the solution, we see that it connects to E and then T. We already have T in place, so if E comes before T, we will have to move it in between N and T. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, M comes after P and finishes at X. Let's add M, connect it to P, and then connect it to our final operation, X, over on the right. Now things are moving along. S comes after T and finishes at X. That's pretty simple. Let's do that now. And finally, we can connect W to X, and we have a chart that is much easier to read and follow. Success! We have created the chart without crossing any lines, and in the process, when we now view the chart from top to bottom, we are starting to see the progression of events in proper perspective. Before we move to the next lesson, let's change the way we look at this chart. For a moment, imagine that each of the letters represents a task to be completed. The chart tells us the order in which each task has to be done, but not how much time is involved to finish each one. In our next lesson, we are going to complete this logic diagram exercise, taking it one step further by adding the time it would take to complete each operation. We will then create a two-scale chart which will finally give us the proper perspective and overview of the entire project. Stay tuned.